Hello, friends, both old and new. I am John St. Baptiste, and this is Talkin' Tolkien. It's good to see everybody out there. Well, let me ask a question. I'm using a slightly new piece of tech. Can everybody hear me well? Hello? Can everybody hear me well? Good? Sounds okay? Cool. Fantastic. I'm glad to hear it. Welcome all to the inceptual episode of Talkin' Tolkien, where we are going to be covering the works of J.R.R. Tolkien. What we're doing for the next while is breaking down, in general, 2 chapters a week from the Fellowship of the Ring. I personally think it's a really nice starting point. My one thing that I have to ask is please put an @ with my name if you have a question you'd like to ask me. Because I do not have somebody with me today, so I have to follow the chat by myself. It is so good to see all of you, and I'm going to say hi to everybody who's in the house right now. More people are coming along soon, but right now we have Anime Lover Nicole. By the way, Anime Lover, have you caught the AMVs that I've put up this week? Some really good stuff. Especially if you're into music and anime, it's really good. We have Storm Steel. Welcome. Good to hear from you. We have Bear Island Josh, the man, the myth, the legend. We have Zeta Alpha, who is probably the only person who I know who knows more about music than I do. Blows my mind. We have OTDA. Hey, OTDA. We also have, like I said, guys, sorry, things are slowed down a little bit just because I don't have somebody here with me to keep an eye on the chat quite as much. We have Bravosi Broadcast. Check out her channel. Freaking great stuff. And we have the Fearless Mermaid. And of course, we have the one spanner who rules them all, Brian Holler. So welcome all, welcome friends. If you're in the chat or you pop into the chat and I don't happen to say hi to you, I apologize. If you're watching this afterwards, welcome just the same. The works of Tolkien are an absolute fat passion of mine. I was about to say fashion. I don't know why. Absolute passion of mine. And, oh, we have House Lord Rich here. Hello, Steve York. But yes, welcome all. If you are someone who has read these books extensively, great. If you have never read these books and you've only seen the movies, great. If you've never had anything to do with anything Tolkien, great. Because that's what this channel's here for, is to share and learn from each other. Eventually, I plan to have a few guests, but today, keeping it a little more intimate. So we are discussing the very beginning of the Lord of the Rings. And we're discussing very, very, very briefly, because it's boring if you aren't into printing information, a note on the text. We're talking about the author's foreword, and we are talking about the prologue, which sets everything up. Now, I do have to tell you, if you've never read this work before, or if you aren't terribly familiar with Tolkien's work, the prologue gives you a lot of information, but there's so much more out there, especially with all the things that Christopher Tolkien took and published posthumously in the name of his father to dig of all of Tolkien's notes. And we're talking 70 years worth of writing. And the man was absolutely amazing. That's why I admire him so well. And this book, or books, probably in the form you have it, is so integral to just about everything in my life. So, now, if you are interested in keeping up with the book, whichever you'd like to call it, you can find plenty of copies all over the place. Amazon, used bookstore, whatever. This is a little harder to find, but I love it, and it's a single copy. This is the one that has all of my notes written in it. It has highlights. It has pens. If you want to call me a book rapist, go ahead. But I'm a student more than anything, and that's how I handle books. Obviously not really high quality books. That more like, this I picked up for like $30 or whatever. Which for those of you in the EU, it's about €21. But if obviously I'm not going to take and make notes in something that's 50 years older than I am. So, first off, if anybody out there in the chat have something to say, what's your experience with Tolkien? I'm very interested to know. Because I want to know where everyone's coming from here. Seems like everybody we have here in the chat is pretty familiar with the work, so that's cool. And like I said, if you're not, welcome, please. Welcome to Arda. And in the name of Anna Iluvatar, I bid you welcome. And may Our Lady of the Stars shine down on you. So let's go ahead. We're going to start off with something that is so phenomenally integral to this entire story and this entire book. One moment. Three readings for the Elf Kings under the sky. 7 for the Dwarf Lords in their halls of stone. 9 for the mortal men doomed to die. 1 for the Dark Lord on his dark throne. 1 ring to rule them all. 1 ring to find them. 1 ring to bring them all. And in the darkness, find them. Those words changed my life when I was a child. I would like to think I'm extremely acquainted with this work. I will be 43 in less than a month. And I have read this book at least once a year, every year since I was 14 years old. And those words changed my life. They absolutely mean the world to me. And I start a reading of this every day, the day after Christmas. It's a tradition of mine. December 26th, I start reading this work. So, that being said, let's please dive right in. Okay. Like I said, this is the boring part. We're going to get it out of the way really fast. Notes on the text. Not everybody is as into history of printing and the way books are made and the way edits are done and so forth as I am. It's porn for me, but I'm sure for most people it's something that's going to put you to sleep. But we do start off with notes about the publishing history. A lot of people are not familiar. Ace Books illegally published the work in the United States back in the late 1960s, I believe it was. And yeah, it must have been because he was still alive. He passed away in 1971. And I agree, Zeta Alpha. I haven't found a better author than Tolkien. He's my first love. La primera amor es la mejor amor. My French isn't very good, but it's far better than my Elvish. So please don't anybody expect me to speak Elvish well if I do. But the one very important part that's here is the very first sentence that's written in these notes, and that is that The Lord of the Rings is erroneously called a trilogy, when in fact it's a single novel consisting of 6 books plus appendices, sometimes published in 3 volumes. Remember that. This is all one book. This is all one story. And it was meant to be, but it was published right after the Second World War in England, when they were in an economic recovery, and the cost of publishing 1,200 pages plus maps was pretty unable to be done. So the Alan Unwin decided to break it up into 3 books, and that's how it was published. That's all the publishing notes I'm going to give you guys. If you're terribly intrigued and interested in this, please private message me. All my social media stuff's down in the section below, and we can talk about all sorts of publishing history and things like that. But it would probably bore the living crap out of 99.99999% of the population in the planet. Welcome, Bobby Catalano. I haven't seen you in forever. It's really good to see you. So here we are. We're going to go ahead and talk about this. We're starting with the foreword from the author. These are all of Tolkien's notes about how he wrote this. Now, what he did, the history of Middle-earth is something that he wrote his entire life. Like, he started while he was still an undergraduate and was writing about until the day he died is the history and the tales and the story of Middle-earth. So the Lord of the Rings is just a small little section. Like, you have the different ages. And the first age, every year was 7 years. So you have the first age, the second age, the third age, which is when this story happens at the very end of it. And then the fourth age, which is the age of man, which comes afterwards. Which we will get into in a little while. But Tolkien this work, essentially, he wrote from when he was 17 until the day he died. And very fortunately, his son collected a lot of his notes and republished them. And that's something that I'm hoping to eventually get into. Apparently, some people are having problems finding the link. Braun, you said you're going to take care of that. Thanks so much. And thank you, Storm, for bringing it up. So he incorporated all of his work into this world, but it was all separate. In 1937, he published The Hobbit, which had been a story that he wrote for his children. And then we have a few years later, because it was relatively successful, they asked him to write a sequel. He didn't really want to write a sequel. He was much more interested in writing about things long before that, back in, as I said, the first stage of Middle Earth. And he wasn't sure, but then he came up with a story. He's like, okay. By it's going to take a minute, he meant 14 years. Because he would start the work and then get to a certain point, and then he's like, no, I don't like this. And instead of nowadays when we can, cut and paste and so forth, nope, he went all the way back to the very beginning and started rewriting the entire thing. So it took him quite some time to go ahead and get this written, let alone published. And as I said before, when he went to his publishers, because of cost prohibitions, wasn't able to be published as one book with 6 books in it. It was broken up into a trilogy. And that is the basis. By the way, for any of you fantasy and science fiction fans, it is really kind of the basis for the trilogy, which you see all the time now. And then you also have writers like Robert Jordan and George R. R. Martin, who do series that are much longer. But the word trilogy, literally alludes to Tolkien's original work, even though that wasn't what he had planned. But he worked on it, he wrote it, and as I said, it took quite some time. It finally got published, and it did not take off overnight. A lot of people think that. A lot of people think it was published and everybody discovered it, and they're like, oh my gosh, this is the most amazing book ever, blah, blah, blah. No, that did not happen. It actually took quite a few years for it to pick up, but it was like a perpetual motion machine almost. Once it picked up a little energy, it just kept going. And by the way, if anyone doesn't believe that a perpetual motion machine is possible, The Lord of the Rings is one. We are talking about the best-selling book in the world in the 20th century, save the King James Bible. And that's been going on for a while. I mean, it was the King James Bible was published quite some time ago, so they got the history on their back. But and this is a work that he created, and it's about this world that he created, and he made all of this legend and mythology behind. So he actually had to go back, because originally the way The Hobbit was printed. And by the way, if anybody has a printing of The Hobbit before 1940, and you want me to contribute significantly to your children going to college, hit me up in a private message, because you have no idea what I would pay for that. I'd probably sell a car. At least. But so he made this work, and it's just absolutely amazing. But there are notes that he put here in his foreword, and I'm just going to talk about. His first thing that he was always adamant, absolutely adamant about, is that this was not a parallel of World War II. It was not an allegory. Now, there is a difference between allegory and applicability, as he says here. Applicability is when one can take certain circumstances and say, oh, hey, this kind of mirrors it. But he always had such an absolute testament for allegory, which is when, very thinly veiled, you're telling one story, but you're really telling another. So, as he says, the way the book ends would be entirely different if this were an allegory of World War II. And we're going to get to the way the book ends when the book ends. Feel free to read ahead if you've not read this before. But another thing I do have to say before I go a little more into the forward is, if you have seen the films, Peter Jackson did an amazing job. Absolutely amazing job. He earned an Oscar. Actually, the movie, The Return of the King, swept the Oscars. And I am not taking anything away. All I'm saying is, when things are transferred from the written word to film or to telly, or something's transferred from film to written word, a lot of things have to be changed just because of the basic medium of the work. And so there are certain things that, if you've only seen the films, are going to be covered when we talk about the book, that were left out or really kind of brushed over, or slightly pushed aside. There are certain things that work, as I said, very well on the page that do not work in film. There's a certain character, and when we get to that character, we're going to talk about him. One of my favorite characters, who was great on the page, but in the film would have been a ridiculous dumpster fire. And in fact, I think in the film they would have changed this character's name to 2020. But so yeah, this is something that he was always adamant about. In fact, if I may, I'd like to read a quote. I cordially dislike allegory in all its manifestations, and always have done so since I grew old and wary enough to detect its presence. I much prefer history, true or feigned, is varied applicability to the thought and experience of the readers. I think that many confuse applicability with allegory, but the one resides in the freedom of the reader, and the other in the purpose domination of the author. And that's the thing. Any good piece of literature, you take your own thoughts and your own meanings of it. I think of other favorite works of mine, and I have a different interpretation than other people do, and I took something different from it than other people have. In fact, another book that I absolutely love is The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. And what I took from that, reading it as a youth and reading it as an adult, were very different from one another. Plus, also, very dissimilar to what a lot of other people have taken from it. And that's fine. That's why we read books, is to enhance ourselves and enhance our lives with great literature and make our own thoughts, apply our own lives to it. So yes, that's something that Tolkien was extremely adamant about. And the one thing that I have to tell you, if you've not seen the films, if you've not read the books or so forth, this is an extremely tragic story. Keep that in the back of your mind the entire time. Anyone who speaks of this work as a fairy tale happy ending was not paying attention, because that's not what's going on here at all. Every bit of beauty and wonder and amazingness in the world also has its counterpart. And anything worth having has a price. No one appreciates anything that's free. So yeah, we go on with the foreword. Tolkien talks about the plagiarism that Ace Books did back then. And that's why most likely most people will have a copy that says this is the author's original work, and goes into that. Moving on to the prologue. Concerning hobbits, I'm going to let the chat talk for a minute because I want to see what everybody knows concerning hobbits. I just noticed Nancy's here. Welcome. Good to see you. Yes, Brunholler, concerning hobbits and other matters. But particularly, does everybody know what a hobbit is? Zeta Alpha, good kind people that love good land for crops and eating and drink along with the pipeweed. And then Barrel Island Josh says, ooh, do we start back with the bull roarer took? Bobby Catalano knows that they enjoy elevenses. The Fearless Mermaid says she's been called one. There's nothing that's pretty awesome. In fact, I'm going to call you a hobbit from now on. I hope you feel blessed. Yes, so they're smaller people, and as Beryl and Josh points out, there was a legendary epic warrior in Hobbit society, which is kind of a contradiction, but hey, one has to protect oneself. Don't go out looking for a fight, but hey, if people are coming, you got to defend yourself. And the bull roarer took it. Took. Sorry for anybody Scottish out there, I pronounced it incorrectly. The bull roarer took. Really like kicked some goblin ass. And he was tall enough to ride a pony, which gets me to the first thing that one would notice about hobbits is that they're rather small physically. Generally 3 to 4 feet high. And as Zeta Alpha said, they're very agrarian society. They just want to be at peace. They, do their own thing. Everybody else can do theirs. And they have, some people might look at it as a stagnant society because they found exactly what they like. They found exactly how they like to live. And then they've just stuck to it since the beginning. I personally think that the society is almost idyllic. By the way, if you want something that, speaking of the word ideal, if you want something that really influenced a lot of work of Tolkien in a lot of ways, read Idylls of the King by Tennyson. Great book. Absolutely amazing book. Ron Holler says, as far as she's concerned, they found Nirvana. Yes, Beryl and Josh. Golfin Grimcam. I thought his name was Golfin Bull. But regardless, it started with golf. And that's the way the game of golf was invented, because Boror took, during this battle, knocked off the goblin's head and it fell into a rabbit hole. And that's how golf was invented. Nancy, you think you might be a hobbit? Yeah, you're a wee bit tall for one. Not too tall though. You're a lot smaller than I am. Zeta Alpha wants to go to the Green Dragon. Yeah, that'd be a fun place to hang out at. But so hobbits, they love simple pleasures. They love a hard day's work that at the end of the day you get done. You go have a meal. You go, generally, if you're a bachelor, but even if not, or bachelorette, go to the local pub, hang out with friends, talk to them, so forth. It specifically says they did not understand or like machines more complicated than a forge bellows, a water mill, or hand loom, though they were skillful with tools. A lot of this reflects a lot of the way Tolkien thought. You have to remember, this is a man who watched, as he grew up, this idyllic countryside turn into smokestacks and factories and coal burning plants and things like that. Industrialization. And it was always something that he had a really huge issue with. In one moment. So, it was always something that Tolkien had a really huge issue with. And so that theme, I think, as I said, this isn't an allegory, but I think that one sees this theme as an undercurrent during this entire work, during everything Tolkien wrote, but particularly during the entirety of the Lord of the Rings. Yes, they like their meals, as somebody pointed out just a bit ago. 6 a day, 7 a day. They're simple people. They like simple pleasures, which is a great thing. I can certainly appreciate that. There's the smaller dwarves, which dwarves are another race, which are slightly taller. And by dwarves, we're not talking somebody who has dwarfism, such as Tyrion Lannister in the Ice and Fire books. But we're talking about an entire race that they're They're smaller than men, but larger than hobbits, and they are part of the earth. They were actually created from the earth. They were. There's some really interesting mythology that we can get into about that sometime soon. Now, the hobbits live in a place called the Shire, which, as I said, is like this almost idyllic community. I mean, but they aren't. It's not like going to a commune. For one thing, they have working running water and showers and soap and stuff like that, which I'm very fond of all of those things. But also they have, this society that's just very self-sustaining. Hey, you do your thing, I'll do mine. We're going to live this way. And so I'm just trying to give you a little bit of background about hobbits as a race and how they think, how they act, how they feel. And they love smoking their pipes. Now, some people think that the thing that is being smoked in their pipes is tobacco, which Tolkien was all about. He was a pipe smoker. I'm a cigarette smoker. By the way, filthy habit. Quit if you do, and if you don't start. It's a filthy, expensive habit. I sat down and figured it out, and if I quit smoking, I'd have an extra $7,000 a year. That's insane. Smoking a pipe's pretty cool though, because, well, like Tolkien was badass. But they love their pipe weed. But some people don't think that he was talking about tobacco, or have taken their own spin and interpretation on that. You can take that where you would like. And then we go back into, he talks about the story about the Hobbit. So why don't we go ahead and do that? There's backstory, a little bit of backstory. And this is going to be a very abridged version of the Hobbit. You have Bilbo Baggins. He's this regular, normal Hobbit doing his Hobbit thing. And he's, I wouldn't want to say gentry, but he is minor aristocracy. They don't have an aristocratic system. They don't have a king. They have a thane, which is pretty important, and we'll get into when we get into the questions if anybody wants to ask. But they don't have a king. But he's definitely in the upper tier of class. And by the way, hobbits age more slowly than humans do. So 50 for them is about 30 for us. And when he's 50, Gandalf the Grey, who the hobbits know as this magician who was a friend of the old Took, who had amazing fireworks shows and took kids on little adventures and loved spending time with children and just enjoying life and making things happy. Nobody had seen him in like 50 years or 40 years, something like that. And then he shows up at Bilbo's door one day and asks him to go on an adventure. Bilbo's like, we don't do adventures. We like things to be calm and quiet and rational. And adventures are messy and so forth. So he's like, no. Well, Gandalf doesn't take no for an answer. Because for those of you out there who actually know what I'm talking about, and those who don't will learn, he's a fracking Istari. He's a demigod. We'll go into that a little more in a little while. But yeah, so he doesn't take no for an answer. Well, Gandalf is trying to help these 13 dwarves out who want who want to claim their homeland back, which was taken away by this dragon Smaug. And basically, through a lot of rigmarole and I almost want to say manipulative selling, but that comes across so poorly. Gandalf gets Bilbo to go on this adventure. A lot of things happen. In fact, if you'd like, after we're done with The Lord of the Rings, if anyone would like, I'll do a few episodes about The Hobbit. I probably won't break it down quite as much just because it's a slightly less intense work. As I said, Tolkien wrote it for his children. So it's not going to have all this intenseness, even though it's in the same world that he set, where he wrote his own 4 languages. Because that's what he was more than anything, was a linguist. He was the linguist who decided to write. He wasn't a writer who decided to go into linguistic art. He created 4 languages. How awesome is that? I mean, the man was absolutely brilliant. But so Bilbo goes on this adventure. While he's on said adventure, in a cave, around a person who is named Gollum, he finds a ring. And this is a very important ring. And he finds out very quickly that if he puts it on, he can turn invisible. And that's where we're going to leave the ring right now. So he can turn invisible. And another very, very, very important thing about the story of The Hobbit is that Gollum wants to kill Bilbo. Bilbo puts on the ring, disappears, gets away, and to get away, he could kill Gollum, but he doesn't. He takes mercy on him. He takes mercy on him because he sees that he is this very pathetic creature. And if you've not read this work, or watch the films, what rock are you hiding under? Because I seriously want to find it and hide there with you at times. But he takes pity on this character because even though this is someone who wants to literally take his life and make him food, he sees how pathetic, and I don't mean pathetic in an insultuous manner. I mean pathetic as in somebody who invokes pity. For those of you who have not read this work, who have not seen the films, and you know someone who has had a serious chemical addiction, that's what Gollum is really reminiscent of. Going back to the allegory versus applicability thing, anytime I think of Gollum personally, and I hope this word doesn't offend anybody, I think of a junkie. The way he acts, the way he thinks, the way his response to everything. And Bilbo discovers this, and instead of killing him, takes pity on him, and he hops over him and goes about his business. Eventually, with the 13 dwarves, they end up going to the mountain. A man named Bard kills the dragon Smaug, who they kind of make friends with, but not really. And That's what's important to the Lord of the Rings. Everything else, if you want me to get more in depth, like I said, we can do some streams on that, and I'll be happy to. But these are the important things that lead up to the story that we have right here. So yeah, the hobbits are off living in their normal land, in their little place. If you read the prologue, it talks all about where they live, which is called Hobbiton, in the Shire, and their idyllic lifestyle, the way they think, the way they feel. It gives you some background. Next, we go to part 2, which is concerning pipeweed, which we've talked about a bit, but it's very, very, very important to hobbits, which is why I think a lot of people think that Tolkien was not talking about tobacco. But I mean, come on, when he wrote these books, he was in his 40s/50s in the early half of the 20th century, and I'm sorry, but as much as I think he was a forward thinker, I don't think Tolkien was sitting around smoking pot. Just saying. But a lot of people took that from it. Some of my favorites have taken it and ran, which once again goes back to applicability. So important stories. Then we have the ordering of the Shire. It's divided into 4 quarters. Roughly, it's the size of, say, if you live here in the States, it's the size of Manhattan, the boroughs, and probably about 15% of New Jersey. For those of you who live in the UK, it's about 2/3 of Wales in size. And for those of you who live in, so I think you all have an idea of where I'm talking about. It's roughly like 50 miles across, 50 miles north to south. Let's just say that. And we talk about that. There's an ancient tradition concerning the High King at Fornost, which this land, the hobbits had migrated from somewhere east of the Misty Mountains. The Misty Mountains divide Middle-earth. Honestly, Middle-earth is very much modeled after Europe. And basically the Ural Mountains would be the Misty Mountains. And so they came from somewhere, which we'll find out about, east of there, west, and when they moved, there was king at Fornost, and he granted them the land that's now the Shire. And all they had to do is pledge fealty. If he needed warriors, he would ask. By the way, hobbits have amazing marksmanship, very good eyes. You rarely see a hobbit with glasses. I envy them quite a bit. But they, so the one thing that he asked is that he didn't even ask to pay taxes. It's help the king's messengers if they come by, and if some sort of combat happens, send some of these amazing bowmen and slingers out. Maybe that happened in the past. Maybe it didn't. We'll find out. But that, I mean, that was all they had to do, and the land was granted to them, and they had this amazing place to go live and stay and do their thing. Then we have, as I brought up, the Finding of the Ring. Now, something that the foreword ends with, or the prologue, I'm sorry, is a note on the Shire records. Now, dating is very important because the time used, it's kind of like in the Hebrew calendar, we're in the year 6000. In the Gregorian calendar, we're in the year 2000. I'm obviously missing the specific dates, but hey. But they're two separate calendars, and it's from the point that it starts. So something to keep very much in mind while you're reading this is that the year that this book starts is 1492 in Shire reckoning, but it is 3000. I'm terribly sorry, I can't remember. I think 3168 in real reckoning. I'll look that up, and I'll definitely go over it next week when we talk about this next Friday to actually start the novel proper. But so timelines are a little bit different because what the Hobbits use is called Shire reckoning, and it's from the founding and establishment of the Shire, as opposed to the ages, which all are essentially defined by massive events. We're going to find about one of those massive events here shortly. But I'm very excited about starting this off. I want to know if anybody out there has any questions they would like to ask me. And please try and avoid spoilers. Does anyone else use as the Nazgul flies as a unit of measurement? Brilliant. Brilliant. Oh, yeah, Bravosi. I have never, as far as I know, used that as a unit of measurement, but I have in a debate class in high school, which was a long time ago, longer than I like to think, brought up the Nazgul as the mindless facelessness of people who do just what they're told to and eventually lose their entire identity. So that would be as close as I get. So let me say hi to some people while you're all coming up with any questions you have to ask me. A lot of you have already said hi to. If I repeat it, hey, you're really special. We have Katrin C from My Point of View. Good to see you. I have not seen you in quite some time. Very good to see you. Zeta Alpha, who I already gushed about earlier. We have Nancy T, the mother of blankets. I have mine right here. She makes amazing blankets. They're very warm. They're very comfortable. They're very pretty. And she's an Ice and Fire fan. So They are printed with ice and fire material. Everybody loves her. We have Santivia Major. How are you doing? House Lorebridge, what's shaking? We have Brand the Bearded Builder. Oh, it's good to see you, man. I have not seen you in quite some time. I hope you're doing well. I know you have some stuff going on in your life right now. I hope it's cool. Actually, I don't normally bring this up on a stream, but PM me about what's going on. Apparently, he's 50 feet up in a tree right now because that's what he does for a living. Bravosi Broadcast. We have OTDA. Top Shelf Fandom. Hey, what's going on, man? It's good to see you. Top Shelf Fandom. I saved his life when he was in Nashville because he was stuck at the airport. And we had the most insane Uber experience of all time because it went to the wrong hotel. It was just madness. It was just crazy. Surreal, welcome. You're new to the channel. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Please stick around. I hope we see you again. Of course, Anime Lover Nicole, as I said. The one spanner that rules them all, Brown Howler. Who else is here? Beryl and Josh was in here for a while, but I know he was heading home from work, so he probably is clicked out by now. If I missed you, let me know. Or even more preferentially, let the one spanner that rules them all, Brown Holler, know. And she'll notify me and say, hey, John, you missed somebody. Fearless Mermaid's home from her walk with her beautiful little pup. So now she can chat. Storm's here. Storm Steel. So, does anybody have any questions about the story leading up to where this book actually begins? Or about hobbits? Or about pipeweed? Or about how, as much as I love GRM, J.R.R. Tolkien is better, and you can just ask Led Zeppelin? Hey, Danny McKay, how you doing, man? Because I want your questions, or your discussion, or any thoughts. Like I said, I'm going to try and have other people on here with me to discuss things on a regular basis, but today it's just myself, and yeah, I'm really interesting. House Lorebridge, Q&A, your favorite race in the series. Idealistically, I would say Sylvan Elves. Which, if people want me to go into the different groups of elves, I can. Idealistically, I'd say Sylvan Elves. But I think that the humans who are not born as the most beloved by God and still by the gods and still rise up and do amazing things are awesome. So I would have to say it's for me, it would be a toss up between Savani and the Rohirrim. Braun said Santivia has a question. Okay. Are you going to give us a backstory for the ring or any other characters? I can, and I will. My plan is to let that history unfold as the story goes on, because it is told a bit from the main character's perspectives. I mean, it's written in third person omniscient, but it's still told from the character's perspectives. So the amount of history I plan to share is going to be as the story goes on, but it seems like everyone here has a knowledge of the story. So if you would like, I can go into a bit of the history about the ring. I can't put up a vote, but everybody, please tell me the history of the ring, or the history of the characters, or do you want to hear that? Do you want to build into it as the story goes along? What would you prefer? I make this for you. I'm not monetized. The one thing I do have to say is relatively soon I am starting a Patreon, and none of that money is going to me. It is going to the Fender Music Fund and the Gibson Music Fund, because both companies have funds where they donate instruments to children who can't afford them. And I'm really stoked about that. If you can show me, if any one single person can show me that they have made a donation to one of those causes before I put the Patreon up, I'll start wearing my Tolkien tweed jacket, which, yes, I do have one. Q&A, why are the tools, do you mean the Tooks and Brandybucks, more brave than the rest of the hobbits? I would think it's probably a societal thing. I mean, the Tooks are kind of, I wouldn't say standoffish, but they all do their own thing. They all live together in the same, like, huge hill that's dug out, and it's called the Great Smales. And imagine having essentially an entire town underground, but it's on the outskirts. It's on the northern outskirts. So they come across things that are a little more wild, and same as the Brandybucks. They live beyond the River Barrendwin, which the hobbits call the Brandywine. And they are closer to things outside of the Shire. It's actually a running theme that you see throughout the first portion of book one, is that there's is that outside of the Shire is a lot different than inside the Shire. So that would be my answer to why Brandybucks and Tooks are a little more brave, a little more adventurous than people who live further into the Shire. It's kind of like the difference one would have between someone who lives right outside of a unsettled area and someone who lives in the middle of the city. Because they didn't have suburbs back then, so you didn't have that like in the middle thing. So that would be my answer to that. Q&A, where would I live in Middle Earth? Rivendell. No question. I mean, Mermaid, come on. You know how many books I have. That's where the best library is. Ask Elrond. He's been keeping it for a good 7,000 years. How about yourselves? Yeah, that's a good question. Where anybody else who's here who has read these books, where would you live in Middle Earth? Nancy T. Okay, I know you weren't here at the beginning. What I said was that if you are extremely familiar with the books, like myself, or if you've only seen the movies, or if you've never seen the books or the movies, um, welcome. And you said you've seen the films, but you've never read the books. Well, recommended order, as I got into a bit earlier. I mean, Tolkien wrote about Middle Earth his entire life, essentially. We're covering the Lord of the Rings right now, so I would start off with probably the easiest copy you're going to find is going to be in the 3-book saga, uh, as opposed to, as Tolkien said, it was supposed to be one single book with 6 books in it, but there were prohibitive reasons that they couldn't do that. So I, especially since it's what we're talking about, I would go with the Lord of the Rings. The first book is the Fellowship of the Ring, just like the film's named. Next week we're going to be talking about the first 2 chapters, and I know that you can find it if you're in a situation where you are afraid or can't even go to a bookstore, depending on where you live in the world right now. You can find it on Audible. You can find it on Amazon. And on Audible, it's not very expensive. But yes, that is where I would start off. The Hobbit's more of a prelude. And as I've said a few times, I'd be happy to discuss that at some point in time. Maura Lee, what's going on? Beautiful. It's good to see you. Okay, so the Fearless Mermaid says she would live in Mirkwood. Nice. What part of Mirkwood? Nancy T, I agree with you. Lonely Mountain with all those golden gems. Yeah, I wouldn't say that's shallow. I'm just practical. That's why I like being financially comfortable. Or at least I put forth all the work I can. Anime lover Nicole would live in Rivendell. Morley would live in Rivendell. Zeta Alpha's summer home would be in the Shire. Surreal would live in a lot of people, a lot of Rivendell lovers. I'm going to have a lot of neighbors. Zeta said he traveled between the Shire and Rivendell. Yeah, if money weren't an object, I would have an apartment in downtown Minneapolis and a cabin in the absolute bumfuck middle of nowhere in what used to be called Franklin's State, which is it's the point where Kentucky, Tennessee, and West Virginia meet. To me personally, it's the most beautiful part of our entire country. So I can completely understand that. Oh, surreal. You're Troy Bravo. Okay. Uh, Fearless Mermaid. Do you mean Dole Gilder? Anywhere away from there? Yeah, I wouldn't want to be chilling around Dole Gilder. It's not too pleasant. I mean, if somebody's title and job are the necromancer, they're probably not too pleasant of a person. Morelli would love to live in Hobbiton as well. OTDA, you used to live on State Franklin Road. Okay, so you knew exactly what I'm talking about. Like, I don't think one could compare it to the Shire, because the Shire, I think, like, farms and gardens and hedgerows and things like that. But I think just epic natural beauty, I think, is the most beautiful part of the United States. Nicole, you're going to bed. Good night. It was good to see you. Always good to see you. Bless up. And PLUR. Yeah, Mora would travel between the Shire and Rivendell. You know, there's some really wild country out there. Maybe you and Zeta ought to, like, hang out. You know, just to be safe, safety numbers. In fact, bring me Hobbit food from the Shire when you come visit Rivendell, if you don't mind. Anybody else have some questions? Do you want history about the ring? Do you want me to go into this? I'm more than happy to, if you would like. Like I said, I make this channel for you guys. So if you'd like some history on the ring, you'd like some history on Middle Earth, I'll be happy to give it to you. Santivia Major would visit Lonely Mountain. She likes shiny things. I would love to go to Lonely Mountain. Unfortunately, though I've done what I can to get rid of most of my vices, there's no way I can avoid avarice, and I'd probably walk out of there with something. Fairest Mermaid would love to tour Gondor. Yes, absolutely. Kind of like it'd almost be like going to like New York City. Which, by the way, a misconception a lot of people have, if you've read this or seen the films, Gondor was not meant to be the capital, I'm sorry, Minas Tirith was not meant to be the capital of Gondor. It was originally Osgiliath, and then because of wars and things, they had to escape a bit. Okay. Let's see. Yeah, good night, Nicole. God bless you. The history on the One Ring. Okay. Now, this will be going into in 2 weeks when we get to the chapter called The Shadow of the Past. But so you had the elves who Sauron, who, by the way, was just the servant of Melkor. But Melkor got his ass handed to him, and he's gone now. At least until the end of the world. There's so much Norse mythology that's repeated in Tolkien's work. But yeah, so Melkor got his ass handed to him on a paper plate, and Sauron, rather than like own up and say, "Hey, I'm sorry," and fix things, he just like ran off and did his thing. And he wanted to rule. He wanted to impose his power. So the Noldor, which is one of the races of elves, they were intrigued with making things and creating and learning everything. Once again, Tolkien was so well read and so referential. It's almost like the fall of man. Like knowledge caused more problems for the elves, particularly the Noldor, than anything. And then later it caused a lot of problems for other people. But he came in a beautiful, angelic form as the giver of gifts. And he had so much knowledge of creating things. So Kalimdor and Sauron started making some rings. And he did not know it, but Sauron's entire purpose was to make these rings to give to the leaders of those societies. So you have 3 rings for the Elf Kings and Queen, 7 for the Dwarf Lords, and 9 for mortal men. But the elves made their own rings. They used the methods that he taught them, but he never touched them. He never did anything to create them. And that's why when he created the One Ring to rule them all, they knew right away, psychic contact. They knew what had just been done. They all took him off. They're like, no, sorry, not going to do it. But the point of the One Ring was to dominate all of Middle Earth. And he gave the 9 rings to men, and they fell. He gave the 7 rings to dwarves, and the dwarves, they're pretty bad motherfuckers, and did not fall. But rings, all the rings have a certain power, and more than anything, it goes into making a reality of what you desire or getting what you want, which I think is a really, like I said, not allegorical, but at least for me, applicable statement that Tolkien makes about us as people. Because the first fall were the 9 men, the 9 humans. I mean, we don't know that they were actually like men as in males, but by men, I mean a species. Because there are more than one species. So please, while we're doing this series, nobody get offended if I say the race of men. I'm not excluding women. It's just that there's men, there's elves, there's dwarfs, there's hobbits, so orcs and trolls, and a whole lot of other things. Dragons, which somebody asked about, which we'll talk about in just a second. Laura Bridge, you're cutting out of here. It was good to see you. Thank you so much for stopping by. So when the dwarves got their rings, they weren't corrupted by Sauron, but they, as Nancy was talking about earlier, they really dug shiny things. And so, as opposed to their work was enhanced in working metal, working gemstones, things like that, but it also made them greedy. Basically, any of these magic rings, any of these 20 rings are essentially, in their nature, the power to do what is most important to the wielder. But with the caveat that it may corrupt things. It may, you imagine, like we were talking, I was speaking earlier of if I, if I could have 2 homes, one would be in the bumhell middle of nowhere, which I think is beautiful, but I don't think that needs to impose on the rest of the world. Whereas one of the rings of power, if that's what you want, is to create that beautiful, idyllic place where you're going to make it keep growing and you're going to encroach, which is going to shove people out of cities, which is going to make everyone do what you want to do unless you have the domination, fortitude, and willpower to control that and those desires. One thing that is very important said is that the rings of power reflect their wielder. So that's a very short history on the rings. If you want, I can write something up a little more scripted that talks a bit more about it, but I hope that helps and answers a few people's questions. And particularly the One Ring was made to rule them all and have power and domination over all of the rings and therefore everyone and everything everywhere. It's almost like a 2-year-old. Like they want it and they want it now. Lady Starfall, welcome. Good to see you. Okay, I'm going to scroll back up and look for some pictures or some questions. Pictures. Oh, pictures. Dragons. Nobody knows where they came from. Before Sauron, who is the major antagonist in these stories, there was Melkor, who, as I said before, Sauron was a shadow of. And Melkor was actually very, 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 very much modeled after Lucifer in Milton's Paradise Lost. But Melkor. Okay, so here's the weird thing. Melkor could not create things. He could just change them or corrupt them or make it into his own thing, but he couldn't create anything. And that's why Iluvatar, who, okay, I guess the best way to describe this is think of if you took, this is a very, very, very simplified explanation, but I hope it helps. If you took the concept of a singular monotheistic deity, what such as Christians would refer to as God, monotheistic religions, Jewish people would refer to as Yahweh, the practitioners of Islam would refer to as Allah. If you took and had that being, and then there are all these Greek gods under him, like our Greek gods, who except nowhere near as dirty and nowhere near as rapey and pervy and petty, except for one, and that was Melkor, who was most high and beloved of all. And so dragons, the history of dragons is very confusing because Melkor, in some texts, it says he created dragons. But then in other texts, it says he is incapable of creating things. So, yeah. Surreal, yes, one dragon was as big as a mountain. That was Anglican the Black, who crushed the original city of Gondolin. All right. Am I missing anyone's questions? Because if I'm missing your questions, it's not intentional. It's not out of rudeness or anything like that. I just, as I said, I don't have anybody here sitting with me, so I can't follow the chat quite as well as I normally would. Sasuke, hey, good to see you. You still have to read these books. Well, maybe you ought to do so. I'm not asking for a huge commitment, just 2 chapters a week. And follow this, of course. Also, for anyone who's out there later, who's not in the chat, thank you for stopping by and checking this out. If you have any questions, drop them in my comment section. So, as I said, seems most people think, most people here have either read the books, seen the films, or both. Who has some more questions for me? Because I like mainline Tolkien. I do. I've got the Tolkien track marks. Okay, if anybody found that tasteless or hurtful or whatever, I apologize. Just a joke off the top of my head. Surreal. Are you asking about Gandalf's ring? Lady Starfall, in answer to your question, because I know you showed up a bit later. The Silmarillion is great. It's absolutely genius. It's brilliant. I don't. Oh, back to the metaphor. It's not the Tolkien gateway drug. It's like that's the hard shit. And I do eventually plan to get to that. But no, what we're doing here today, we discussed any history things that people want to ask. And we discussed the author's notes and the prologue. So we're starting with first chapter. The first 2 chapters of The Lord of the Rings will be coming up next Friday, 6 p.m. Eastern, 1800. Please be here if you guys can, because I'd love to see you. If you want to read ahead, go ahead. But I think to introduce people to the world of Tolkien as much as I like him and enjoy his work, the Lord of the Rings is a good place to start. Because it's not like The Hobbit, which he wrote for his children, which takes place in the same world that he wrote from the trenches of the Somme to the day he died, a few years before I was born. You know, I mean, that was that world that he created. The Hobbit, I don't personally think is the best place to start. And the Silmarillion, for the exact opposite reason, I don't think is the best place for a reader to start. Because it reading The Lord of the Rings, starting with Fellowship of the Ring, then we have the Two Towers, The Return of the King, is like reading The Stand. And if you get the reference, reading the Silmarillion is like reading the Bible. And it as much as I absolutely love the work, I don't think it's the best starting off point, especially for the more casual reader. Yeah, Zeta, I read ahead of any groups that I'm into. Sasuke, it was so good to see you. Thank you for stopping by. If you have time, hit me up. I'd like to talk to you. I actually have some music questions I really want to ask you about. By the way, Sasuke is one awesome chick. Just saying. If you ever get the chance, she did a video with me about the music of Game of Thrones, and it's a really cool video, really informative. I learned so much from her. Storm, you'll be here again every week because it's Tolkien. Thank you. Yes, and if you have any friends who are into Tolkien, please invite them. Please invite them. Like I said, I am not one of those content creators who I don't do this as a job, which there are plenty of great content creators who that's their job. That's how they pay their bills. And then there are some who do it to just grab what cash they can. I just do this because I love sharing music and literature with everybody. And I'm so stoked that we're finally starting Talkin Tolkien, because I have a passionate love for every work by that man. Okay, so are there any questions I missed? Please repeat them here in the chat if I missed them. Oh, Surreal says Gandalf and Galadriel both wear rings. Discuss. Spoiler alert. So, Surreal, do you know who wore the other elvish ring? Yeah, Gandalf has a ring. Galadriel, Lady of the Starlight, has a ring. Who has the other one? There you go. Fearless Mermaid's got it. Elrond. So there is a ring of water, a ring of fire, and a ring of air. And the elvish rings, like I said, were never touched or used by Sauron, so he never had anything to do with them. And the elves didn't really give half of two shits about dominating and oppressing. Well, most of the elves. There were some who did. We'll go into that some other time. But they were made to create things. I wonder why there isn't an earth one, because it would be really cool if there were like an earth, wind, and fire ring. Just saying. That's probably just because I really dig earth, wind, and fire. But the purpose behind the rings that the elves made was about creation and taking care of things and just creative and preservative magic as opposed to domination. But yes, the three Elvish rings. Yes, those are the people who have them. Spoiler alert. There's a really interesting story behind each of those. Does somebody want me to go into that, or is that going to be too spoilery for everybody? Also, how's everybody doing out there? Right here in Ohio, we have a freaking heat wave. I hate it. Fortunately, my air conditioner has 6 settings, and they are low, medium, high, mausoleum, morgue, and John's house. Zeta, it's 91 degrees there. You're here in the Midwest too, right? Zeta Alpha? In fact, I think you're in Ohio, aren't you? Which is where I live. Also, where the Fearless Mermaid lives. She's a freshwater mermaid. She swims in Lake Erie as opposed to the ocean. Yes, Surreal. Gandalf has fire, Galadriel has water, and Elrond has air. Oh, Nancy T, your kids are like me. You have to wear a jacket when you visit them. Yeah, it well, to you know, pop to the oh, okay, Zeta, you're in Kansas. Okay. Which is, yeah, if I have a passenger, would be like a 9-hour drive for me. If I'm by myself, it'd be about a 6-hour drive, but I have a heavy foot. Lady Starfall says it's 82 in New Jersey. Beautiful day. If you like that type of weather, that's great. For me, a beautiful day is like 70. If you get over 75, I'm terribly uncomfortable. But yeah, Nancy T, you remember when we were at Con of Thrones last year? I would go from the air conditioned hotel room to the air conditioned Uber to the air conditioned convention center to the air conditioned wherever we were hanging out to the air conditioned Uber to because just dealing with Nashville in July for me is like I'd get time out of purgatory for that, or at least I ought to. Zeta, yeah, I'm closest than Nazgul flies, right? Beautiful, perfect. All right, Braun, thank you so much for coming by. Thank you so much for wielding your spanner. Glad you didn't have to hit anybody over the head with it. It's a very good thing. So yeah, we'll talk about the history of the Elven Rings really quick, and then I'm probably going to go ahead and get off of here. I've kept you folks here listening to me by myself for almost 2 hours, and I don't know how you do that. But the 3 Elven Rings were originally created by Celebrimbor, and they were given to Gil-galad and Círdan, who watches the ocean going east, or going west, my apologies, which that's a story for an entire another time, all about the boats going west. And the other was given to Galadriel, who, by the way, if you're someone who's just seen the films, think about the fact that Arwen, yes, Liv Tyler, who, by the way, to the date, to the year, shares a birthday with me, which is just cool as shit. But Arwen, her grandmother was Galadriel. Galadriel was like 16,000 years old. So she's one of the earliest, and she stayed in Middle Earth. Once again, huge story that's like very difficult to go into, and I could keep people here for hours. But so Gil-galad, when he passed, his bannerman was Elrond, and he gave his ring to Elrond. And when Gandalf and the other 5 Istari, who are the wizards, who would be named Gandalf, Radgast, Saruman, Palando, and Utomo, when they showed up, let's just say Círdan knew something. He had a feeling, gut instinct, and he gave his ring to Gandalf and said, "You're going to need this," essentially. And that's why Gandalf has the Ring of Fire. If one pays attention throughout the entire Lord of the Rings series and The Hobbit, everything Gandalf does magically. And the reason I do the air quotes on magically is because Tolkien's concept of magic is so much different. It's inspired forces of nature. It's not like, I mean, I can do magic. If anybody would like, please hit me up. We're separated by the social distancing and distance in general, but I'll be happy to do some sleight of hand for you anytime you like. It's a passion of mine. Has been since I was a wee little baron. But he gave it to him because he said, "You're going to need this." And if you pay attention, and during The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, anything magical that Gandalf does involves fire. Nancy T, what are you shocked about? Yes, Fearless Mermaid, it has been 2 hours. It doesn't seem like that. Well, thank you. I probably wouldn't be a celibate recluse if more women felt that way about being around me. So does anybody else have any questions about the history before the story starts? Surreal Liv Tyler's the hottest woman alive. And she is an elf. She is an elf. I saw her last year on The Late Show, and she has not aged a day. So either she's an elf or she's bathing in the blood of virgins like Elizabeth Bathory. And she doesn't come across to me as the bathing in the blood of virgins type of person. Nancy, you're jealous of Galadriel's age? I don't know. I think I'd get bored and sad. Especially watching so many people die over such a long period of time. Zeta Alpha, time flies with interest flows. Well, thank you. Someone who I have quite a bit of respect for, I will take that as a huge compliment. Yeah, Nancy, Liv Tyler is pretty stunning, and her dad's pretty cool too. I'm a pretty big fan of her dad, who actually put her in some of the Aerosmith videos back in the 90s. And you look, and like I said, she's a freaking elf or she's a vampire, because you watch watch the video for Crazy, which she's in, and look at a picture of her now, and she has not aged a freaking day. Surreal, not Battery. Did you mean Bathory? Elizabeth Bathory? Yeah, Zeta Alpha, I agree. Steve Tyler is pretty awesome, but he's not anywhere near as nice to look at as his daughter is. He is not aged quite as well. Of course, one has to take into consideration that he made quite a few life decisions during the first 35 years of his life that have probably influenced how ridiculously old he looks, even though he's still alive and kicking. So does anybody else have any more Tolkien questions? Okay, doesn't seem like it. Well, next week we're going to talk chapters 1 and 2, which are called Heavens. I should know this. I should know this like the back of my hand. The first is a long expected party, which is a play on the first book of The Hobbit, is an unexpected journey. And the second is The Shadow of the Past. You're going to get a hell of a lot of backstory. If you would be so kind, please take the time to read those 2 chapters in the next week. And it's about 75 pages. And because chapter 2 is really long. Good, but it's a ton of backstory. But yeah, it's only about 75 pages. And we'll discuss it next week. Now, the way I'm going to set this up next week is we're going to start off with Q&A, and then I'm going to do my overview. And then I'll finish with another Q&A. So I am looking forward to seeing all of you. Anyone who would like to just chat a little more today, drop down to my description and you can find my social media. Hop into my Facebook, private message me, and we can start a party chat. So I am so glad all of you came out here. I hope you had an amazing time. I love sharing this work with you. And I love that you're all coming out. This is a scary, hard time in the world. And it's really awesome. I have to do a bit of shameless self-plugging. I did put up a music video today. It's called PB and the J's Optional. And it, if you're into music, is all about how the Beach Boys and Beatles influenced each other and each made each other's works so much better. And the very polite rivalry that was between Brian Wilson and Paul McCartney. Very polite rivalry, as opposed to a rude, nasty type of rivalry. So hit me up if you want. I will be back online in about 10 minutes. I do have some human needs to attend to. I am so glad all of you came out. It was so great to see you all. I'm looking forward to next Friday, 1800 Eastern Standard Time. I'm going to roll out of here. In the meantime, if you would be so kind, PLUR, be excellent to one another, party on, and keep sailing west.